Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Franchise Hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the Chicago Blackhawks. We are at the beginning of 2023, nearing the halfway point in the 2022 to 2023 NHL season, and the Blackhawks have been respectable. Doesn't sound that exciting, but our goal this year is to rebuild, and we just need to avoid last place. And thus far, we're doing that. We definitely are avoiding last place, part of the benefit of being in a division with the worst team in hockey, the Arizona Coyotes. As far as the rebuild itself, it hasn't really accelerated yet. We do have 2 first round picks in the upcoming draft, our own and Tampa Bay's pick. And right now it looks like neither the Blackhawks nor the Lightning will be in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So that would be positive in terms of the potential quality of those 2 picks. So that can certainly help accelerate the rebuild. The other thing that we're going to need to do over the next month and a half till we get to the trade deadline is figure out what is going to happen with Chicago legend Mr. Taves. He is looking for a ton of money to come back, although it has come down to $12.2 million. It was over $14 million the last time we spoke with him. But $12.2 million for a player at this point in his career who's got 5 goals, 15 assists, and 20 points in 29 games seems a little much. So we have put him on the trade block. We also have Jake McCabe on the trade block. And what we really need to focus on now is, of the many players we have who are on 1-year expiring contracts, and that's everyone except for Alec Regula and Patrick Kane, who we have re-signed to extensions, and they're kind of at different stages in their career. Kane, an all-time great, nearing the end. Regula, a young prospect who hopefully has many years ahead of him. And Kane has been our most productive offensive player this year, not surprisingly. 15 goals, 14 assists, 29 points through those first 33 games for the Blackhawks. But we've got a lot of other players that we need to kind of figure out what we want to do with. And if we're not going to bring them back, it probably makes sense to see what we can get for them in trade over the next month and a half or so until we get to the trade deadline. No superstars here, but with Kara, Athanasiou, Domi, Kurashev, there's definitely players that we probably want back on our team next year and can potentially continue building around if they're willing to come back at reasonable price points. So that is what we're going to focus on in this episode, continuing to play through January into February, getting to know a little more about some of these players, and then trying to hopefully get some of them signed and get some of them traded for some assets that may be more helpful for us as we do try to rebuild this Blackhawks franchise. And goalie has been a troubling position for us. Mrazek was on the team from last year. You can see he's been pretty ineffective as our backup goalie, a 2-4-1 record with a 4.25 goals against average, despite having 1 shutout. So he's been even worse in those other games that he's played. And we've still got him for another year at $3.8 million. We definitely want to move on from him. In a perfect world, we'd be able to move on from Anthony Stolarz also, who we picked up on waivers when the season started. But I think even in a worst case scenario, he's probably our backup next year. I don't love the amount of money that he's looking for, but I do kind of think that we can bring him back at close to this 2.4 million number for 3 years. Hopefully he'll be becoming our backup at some point over that time. And then if we are able to trade away Mrazek, then that'll still put us in a better position for next year in terms of our financial situation. And I don't think there's any way that Stolarz is going to go for this contract, especially because we've got it as a two-way with a much lower salary in the minors, and we're also $400,000 below what he's asking for. But want to at least get the discussion going. Probably not in a very good way. Definitely wants more money. We put him up to 2.3 million and include the two-way. What does he think of that? He really wants the money, which I can't blame him for. We all want money. All right, 2.35 million with a two-way. So we are going to go ahead and submit that offer to him. And concurrently, we're actually going to put Mrazek on the trade block. I don't know how much interest there's going to be in him, but we do have in the AHL Mr. Stalock, who we moved down there when we were able to pick up Stolarz. So he's a competent-ish professional goalie, I think. Doesn't look like he's played at all this year down there. That's odd. I guess he's behind Soderblom and Stauber. Haven't paid a lot of attention to my minor leagues, obviously. I may actually, just for the heck of it, send Stauber down to the ECHL to Indy, which I'm sure he won't be thrilled with. But then at least we'll get Stalock a little bit of playing time in the event that we do need to use him as our backup if we're able to trade away Mrazek. And Stolarz did quickly sign that extension, so good to know that we'll at least have one competent NHL quality goalie for next season. Clearly would prefer that he ends up being our backup rather than our starter, but at least we know we're going to have him back. Now, if we're able to move on from Mrazek and get something of value for him, that would be even better. And we made another one of the little incremental tiny moves that we hope will help improve the roster over time. We picked up 23-year-old Jarrett Anderson Dolan on waivers from the Kings. He's going to take the roster spot of Luke Phillip, who's been up with us a bit. I would think that Phillip probably can make it through waivers to get back down to the AHL, but Anderson Dolan is a bit better player, a few years younger. Still, according to our scouts, has potential to potentially become a usable National Hockey League player. So, small move, but the types of little things that hopefully will pay dividends for this roster over time. And Mrazek did just get the win for us yesterday against the woeful Coyotes. Apparently the trade rumors on him being added to the trade block are out there now. I think we might as well just actually shop him and see what, if any, interest there is. He definitely is better than Stalock, so I would prefer to keep him for as long as possible. That said, we're really not going anywhere or doing anything major this season, so if we have to move on from him a little earlier and we can get something interesting in return, it's probably still worthwhile. Doesn't look like there's a ton of interest. Sharks would give us a 22-year-old left winger, Dylan Hamalouk. Doesn't really look like much of a prospect. And the Wild, 32-year-old defenseman, Andrej Suster. It's like a decent defensive defenseman, but not much else. So definitely not really excited about either of those offers. Honestly, if we could just get a late draft pick for him, probably would do it. Certainly we'll shop him again as we get closer to the trade deadline, but neither of those is interesting enough to encourage us to move on from him just right yet. And we are definitely getting to a point where we're going to have some roster decisions to make, which may accelerate our interest in trading away some players who aren't part of our long-term plans. The young defender, Nicholas Bowden, is back from injury, and you can also see that the youngster Ian Mitchell, as well as winger Taylor Radish, are close to coming back soon. So that is going to force us to really think about what we want this roster to look like for the long term. Probably actually not for the long term. What we want this roster to look like for the near to medium term. Long term, it's going to take till this off season before we really start doing some of the heavy lifting, I believe. And we did just move on from defenseman Connor Clifton, who we had picked up on waivers not all that long ago from the Bruins. He was in the final year of his contract. We were hoping we might be able to get something for him in trade, but we had to offer him back to other teams that had put in waiver claims on him, and I believe he went to the Sharks. So it does open up the spot on our roster for the youngster Bowden. So that is good because he is younger and probably more likely to be a part of our future, but obviously wish we could have gotten something for Clifton, but those are the breaks. And Taylor Radish, who we have signed for next season, the winger, is ready to come back off of the injured list. And I think we may look to move on from Oscar Sundqvist, unpopular player with his counterparts. He's also in the final year of his contract, making about $2.7 million this year, and he's looking for $3.7 million next year. Just hasn't been really all that great for us this year. 2 goals and 5 assists. Sorry, that was with the Red Wings before he came over. 3 goals and 2 assists with a -6 in 22 games. Admittedly, not getting a ton of ice time, but his game rating is not that great. He's a guy that we picked up on waivers, so we're going to have to offer him back to the other teams if we want to trade him. Oh, I guess no one else claimed him, so we're going to place him on the trade block, and we're actually going to also just shop him right now. If we get offered a draft pick, it looks like there's not a lot of interest. Yeah, no one interested in Sundqvist, so definitely not an optimal situation. Yeah, unfortunately, because we picked him up on waivers, we're stuck with him, and nobody wants him. We can send him down to... Oh, he's got a... Oh. Sorry, I'm messing up in my head, trying to find all the possible outs for a player that I picked up on waivers, but unfortunately there really aren't many. So we're kind of stuck with Sundqvist. Fomentin is another guy that we picked up on waivers who's actually been pretty productive for us. He's not popular, but I think, or actually he's fine with his popularity. It's just that he's disruptive. But so far we've got a pretty harmonious locker room, and he's been pretty productive. So we may kind of have to get to the point where we got to make a decision on Athanasiou or Domi. They're both looking for decent money next year. I like Domi as a player. He's been reasonably productive for us, but he's looking for a lot of money, I believe. He had $5.5 million for a 3-year extension. He's 27 years old. He profiles as someone who should be a pretty productive offensive player, but as I think we may have talked about in a previous episode, it's been a while since his early days with the Canadiens when he was really a dynamic offensive player in terms of his goal scoring. He's been productive for us, at least in terms of his game ratings. One of the better guys on the team at a 68, sadly, which doesn't say a ton about how well the Blackhawks have been playing this year. Athanasiou is kind of similar. It's been a while since he was a real explosive offensive player, but still certainly has traits that would indicate that he could be pretty productive. I don't see us paying $5.5 million-ish to Domi. Athanasiou, I think, is looking for about 3.7 the last time I checked in with him. Yeah, 3.8. So that's still a contract that we may think about. If we can get something for Domi, see what we could get for him right now. There is some interest in him. A lot of old players. I mean, David Savard, decent defenseman. Would prefer some youth. Another defenseman, Ethan Bear, out with a sore elbow. It's his contract situation. Last year, his contract, so that's a little less interesting. Pronounce this one wrong, so you can correct me in the comments down below. Juuso Välimäki. Doesn't really excite me all that much. Andrew Agazzino. 22-year-old wing Blake McLaughlin. He's at least young. Scout thinks he can get a little bit better. Not going to be well liked, a little dirty, maybe a little overconfident. Could wind up as good as Athanasiou. Probably the most interesting offer that we've gotten, but I don't know if it's someone to chase after. Gustav Nyquist. Pass. Yeah, so no one that makes me want to jump at anything right now. Keep him on the trade block, though. We are going to have to open up a spot for a frontliner, though. And Jujhar Khaira is a guy who's 28 years old. I love the fact that he's a grinder and really effective at everything it takes to be a grinder. We're still -7 with him on the ice this year, not getting a ton of ice time. He's looking for about $2.5, $2.6 million next year. Fortunately, he's not one of the guys that's got a attitude problem. Would love to kind of get one of those people off of our team. Kurashev, I don't really want to move on from because he's relatively young. It might just be time to move on from Athanasiou. Let's at least see what. He seems like he can be just such a dynamic offensive player with that speed. Good shot. Good read. Good at getting open. But we talked about this in a previous episode. Had that 130 goal season with Detroit 4 seasons ago at this point, and then hasn't been all that exciting since. I mean, honestly, the season he's having with us with 10 goals in 33 games so far is probably the most productive he's been. But we're still minus 14 with him on the ice. He's unpopular with his teammates. Just don't know how much we're going to get from him. We'll put him on the block also and see if there's anything interesting in the desperation shopping of the players. Guessing it's going to be pretty similar to some of the other offers that we've gotten when we had put Domi on the market. I think the offers for Athanasiou might be even worse. 5th round pick is tempting at this point, sadly. Austin Strand, not that great a defensive prospect. Another 5th round pick. We could probably get a little bit more if we worked on this forever. But it might just be time to move on for a pick. We've got the Sharks and the Blue Jackets both offering us a 5th rounder. Taking a look at the standings. The Sharks are incredible. The Blue Jackets are only a little better than we are, so certainly would prefer to take the Blue Jackets 5th rounder. Not that a 5th round pick is really going to be a difference maker for us, but I don't see him being a guy that we're going to be building around for the long term. I'm just going to go ahead and complete the trade. Want to open up a spot on the roster for Mr. Radish to come back, and that will do that. We've added another pick next year to kind of just bring some hopeful talent into the system. The more late round picks we have, the more chance that we might get someone who's interesting. And I don't think that Athanasiou was in our long-term plans. And obviously he's not anymore at this point, since we've moved on from him. You know, looking at the salary obligations for next year now, we potentially have a ton of money when we go to free agency. There may not be anything interesting that we want to sign in free agency, but we're going to have some money to spend, which will be good. And it was a rough game for the Blackhawks. Lost to Colorado 2-1, and then we also lost Connor Murphy, pretty solid defensive defenseman, to a separated shoulder for the next 1 to 2 months. So we will be able to potentially replace him soon with Ian Mitchell. But quite honestly, I was hoping that when Mitchell came up, I would be able to send Bowden down to the AHL for a little more seasoning and consistent playing time. And now he may end up sticking up here with the big club for a little bit longer than expected. And after signing Stolars to that extension, his jersey has been flying off the shelves, having a nice year for us. Also one of the top 5 selling jerseys in the NFL, or NHL, for the month of January. So some positive news there. We're playing really well until the last week and a half or so of the month of January. The highlight of the month was certainly this 5-game winning streak. Started in Seattle, went to Buffalo, Philadelphia, and then back-to-back shutouts on the weekend against St. Louis and the Kings. Unfortunately, since then, we've lost 3 games in a row, so we close out the Month of January, still in sixth in the Central, definitely falling away in the playoff race, well ahead of Arizona in terms of trying to avoid last place. And honestly, with 3 games in hand and being a point ahead of the Stars at this point of the season, there's still a lot of hockey to be played, but would certainly help that we can stay ahead of them. The Lightning, who we have their first round draft pick this coming year, still on the outside of the playoffs, looking in the Eastern Conference. So still got some time to play, still got a month until the trade deadline, but the Blackhawks are not in a bad position here at the beginning of February. And ownership still generally satisfied with our performance. Fans are satisfied. They're not ready to get rid of us yet. Rosters for the All-Star game. Does not look like we have any Blackhawks in the All-Star game. So that's definitely a little disappointing. You would think that they would throw a proven veteran like Patrick Kane a little bit of a bone, let him be on the team. We're obviously past mid-season at this point. I mean, midway through the season, Kane is clearly the leading scorer on our team. By far the leading goal scorer with 20, although Formenton, who we picked up off the waiver wire with 14, has been a nice addition. 18 assists, not leading the team. That honor goes to Taves, the other longtime superstar, but you can see with 38 points, that's far and away the most on the team. Few guys still hanging around with positive plus minuses, but generally we've been on the ice for more goals by the opponents than our team, unfortunately. Average game rating, Radish, Kane, Kurashev, and Formenton are the clear team leaders. And then Anderson, Dolan, Sundqvist, who are both waiver acquisitions near the bottom, along with Lafferty, the youngster Regula, and McCabe, who we may need to start looking towards moving on from. He's an excellent defensive defenseman, an old school defenseman, but you can see just in terms of most of his defensive ratings is pretty special. But he's going to be 30 next year. He's making pretty good money, and he's not an exceptional all-around defenseman. We have had him on the trade block, haven't really gotten anything too interesting for him. Let's see what we get if we happen to shop him right now. A lot of interest. I'm guessing that it's a bunch of 7th-round picks or older defensemen, older players. So certainly not a robust market for him. The other thing that we want to check in on, and this one will potentially hurt a little bit if we do end up going through with it, though, is what, if anything, can we get for Mr. Taves right now? I have a feeling if we're going to do anything with him, we're going to have to not just shop him, but try to craft a pretty creative trade together, given the amount of money that he's making and the fact that at this point in the season, I would think most teams would be pretty cash strapped. But in preparation for our next episode in the last month until the trade deadline finally gets here, might just be worth seeing what, if anything, the trade market is thinking about in terms of Mr. Taves. So we'll go ahead and shop him. Have a feeling that means no one can take on his contract. Actually, the Flames would give us a 6th rounder for him. Ugh. Feel horrible to give up a true future Hall of Famer for a 6th round pick. been the Blackhawks captain since he was 20 years old. 15 years at this point. Will definitely be a big loss if we have to move on from him. But he's looking for over $15 million a year right now. There's just no way that we can possibly, and we do have the money, so I can't say there's no way we can possibly bring him back at that money. If we wanted to spend him $15 million on Taves, we could definitely bring him back. But as a rebuilding team, I don't think that's in our best interest. Would I like to get more than a 6th rounder for him? Yeah, I definitely would. So in our next episode, when we play through the month of February into early March and the trade deadline, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about these players on the final years of their contract, these older players on our team, and even like in the case of McCabe, a guy who's not horribly old and not in the last year of his contract, but just may not be a player that we want to build around for the long term. So we have got a lot to think about in our next episode, but the Blackhawks thus far, well over halfway through the season, are certainly holding their own. So from that perspective, it's been a not unsuccessful season thus far, and we'll see how it continues to go in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.